Hello everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Talkin Bible podcast. Last episode for the week with Jeannie. Hello Jeannie.
Hi, last episode, but it's a good one.
It's a good one.
Yes.
Why do we always end up talking about demons with you?
I don't know.
I think that God's got a sense of humour.
Yeah,
or
he
you
must.
choose them, do you?
Well, I didn't choose this. I didn't know this was in it. I looked like a good week.
Yeah, we do have some fascinating conversations about demons with you, so here we go.
Why me?
Why you?
Like the person who's the most freaked out by this whole thing often ends up here talking about it.
We do. We're talking about it again today. And we're going to talk about it a lot this year, obviously, because there's a lot of demon casting, a lot of exorcism in Jesus' ministry.
Now you freaked me out. Like, oh no, is something going to happen to me? Why is this me?
No, peace, remember?
Peace be with you.
Peace be with you.
Yes.
It's for a reason. Jesus, you don't have to be afraid of demons. Jesus delivers us from demons, delivered people from demons. All right, so we're talking about Jesus and the accusation that he is doing his exorcism work because he is empowered by the prince of demons.
Beelzebub,
the prince of demons. Yes, so this is a slanderous accusation against him by the religious
Do they say he is Beelzebub or that he works for
He works for Beelzebub.
Okay.
It is by Beelzebub, the prince of demons, that he drives out demons.
Where does that name come from?
It's a Philistine name. It's linked to...
I love how you just know that answer.
I think it was a Philistine, or maybe I shouldn't have been so emphatic about that. I think it's Philistines or from Tyre and Sidon, but it was a god that was worshipped in the area at the time, and I think there's probably Jews would see a direct correlation between Beelzebub and Satan.
So Beelzebub is Satan?
They would accuse, I think if you really cut it down, it's not the same deity. It's not the same being in the sense that if you asked a Philistine, hey, are you worshipping the Jewish Satan, they would say, no, they're not. We're worshipping Beelzebub.
So it's the essence of evil.
It's the essence of evil.
The ruler of evilness.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then the Jews pick that up and attribute that because they have a belief that, all evil comes from the Satan. And so therefore Beelzebub, this evil being, is Satan. He's the prince of demons. That's the accusation, that the prince, or the primary among the demons, the leader of the demons.
Okay, and this appears in 3 of the Gospels.
3 Gospels, Matthew. Yes, it does in my notes here. Matthew,
it's slightly
Mark,
different
and Luke.
in all of them.
Mm-hmm.
But just add on things, explain things a bit differently. But there's a demon-possessed man who was blind and unable to speak, according to Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus healed him so that the man could both speak and see, and all the crowds were astounded and said, "Could this be the son of David?" When the Pharisees heard this, they said, what we're talking about, "This man drives out demons only by Beelzebub, the ruler of the demons," knowing their thoughts. So Jesus didn't
even hear them say
that.
It says here, it seems to indicate that he just knew what they were thinking.
Okay. Every kingdom divided against itself is headed for destruction, and no city or house divided against itself will stand. I wonder how many people accredit that to, is it an American president that said no house divided against itself will stand?
I don't know, but it sounds like something an American president would have said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because people have quoted that to me and said that's what
president
somebody said, and I can't remember who it was.
It was a re-quote of Jesus.
Yes, and I could even be getting that wrong. It could have just been a famous politician, but I remember it as president.
It's actually not even Jesus' words. From memory, I'd have to do the research on it. From memory, I think the scholars think that it was probably a common proverb at the time. The divided kingdom, or the kingdom divided, or...
It's not a proverb in this...
It's not a proverb...
The old scriptures, the Old Testament.
Is it a proverb in the Old Testament?
Look that up.
Yeah, I don't know that it is.
Because it makes...
I think it was a Jewish proverb of the time.
Yeah, as soon as he says that makes sense to me. Well, why would Beelzebub be driving out his own demons?
Yes, exactly. That's the point. Is why would he be casting out demons himself? Yes, that's the first thing that seems to make no sense about it.
Yeah.
Isn't it? While the idea of the kingdom divided against itself is itself being unsustainable isn't a common theme in the Old Testament, it isn't explicit. It is a common theme. It isn't explicitly defined in a single proverb. I had a feeling that it might have been a Jewish proverb at the time. I've just got this vague feeling I've read somewhere that by the time of Jesus, maybe it was in the Jewish Talmud or it was in the oral tradition or something like that. It was something that Jesus, which would make sense to me. Jesus is using their own, it's a proverb that would be familiar to the Jewish elite, and he's using it against them. He's going, you guys even know the concept of a divided kingdom, which fits with what you're saying.
Yeah.
He's going, what a stupid thing to say. You guys saying I'm driving out demons by the power of the demons? Why would you even say that? I mean, your own proverbs say a kingdom divided cannot stand. That'd be a ridiculous thing for me to do. If I really was doing that, why would I do that? My whole kingdom would come crashing down.
Yes, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
But here Jesus calls him Satan.
Yes, he uses the
verse
word
26.
Satan.
If Satan drives out Satan, he's divided against himself. How
Yeah.
will the kingdom stand, as you just said? If I drive out demons by Beelzebub, by whom do your sons drive them out? What?
So,
What does that mean?
well, Jesus wasn't the first exorcist. So in the time
What?
at the time of
But
Jesus,
why, if he's not the first Exodus, why do they... What not
Exorcist.
Exorcist. Why do they call him? Why do they say, "Could this be the son of David"? Do they ask that every time they've seen an
they're
exorcism?
amazed by the success of Jesus' miracles. So, exorcism or
but
casting
he could
out
both
demons
speak and see.
Yes,
Maybe the
that's
other
right.
ones just drove them
exactly.
out.
or certain other things.
Okay.
So exorcism was a common practice at the time of Christ. So there were all doctrines built up around it that you would call on the rabbi or you would call on a special exorcist who would come, and probably for the hundreds of years before that, it had been formed up as a practice, a recognized practice. That Jesus wasn't unique in trying to set people free from demonic oppression. The difference is the degree to which Jesus does it. Like you say, he's healing and setting free blind and deaf people, and whenever it mentions that, that's a direct reference to the Old Testament, the reference to Isaiah. That's what the Messiah would do. So Jesus is upping the game. So that makes sense now, because he's going, well, if I'm the one, if you say I'm casting out demons by Beelzebub, what about your own people? What do you think they're doing? Because look at me, I'm having more success than they are, is basically what he's saying.
Yep.
Who do you think yours are? Because you've got your own exorcists as well that are doing the same thing.
And the reason they ask, "Could this be the son of David?" is because they're thinking of from Isaiah.
Isaiah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it Isaiah or is it Isaiah?
Take your pick.
Okay. I'll go
Tomato,
with...
tomato.
Yeah. Okay.
I think Americans say Isaiah.
Yes,
Sometimes
they
I say
do.
that, yeah.
It continues on here, verse 29. How can someone enter a strong man's house and steal his possessions unless he first ties up the strong man? Then he can plunder his house. Anyone who is not with me is against me, and anyone who does not gather with me scatters. Therefore, I tell you, Jesus talks a lot here.
Yeah.
Therefore, I tell you, people will be forgiven every sin and blasphemy, but the blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven.
Blasphemy against the Spirit.
That makes me ask. We've talked about this
We
before.
have.
What is that?
Yeah, and that's the standard question. And the context is the only real rule we have to understand this. Unless there's some reference to the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit in the Jewish writings at the time, I always, when I say limit it to the Bible, I think it's good to maybe sometimes see whether or not the Jewish writings at the time reference things, because that's the worldview that Jesus is referencing, so sometimes we'll miss something. But in the absence of knowing that whether they had a belief for the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, I think we need to go to the context and go, okay, what is it about this story that Jesus is saying is not forgivable? And I think in its context, Jesus seems to be saying, the problem is you're attributing to the Satan the works of God. That's the thing that you're blaspheming the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is doing these good works, and you're saying these good works are evil. And that is the unforgivable sin.
I hadn't thought about it like that.
Hadn't you?
No, these good works are evil. No, I hadn't. Can you explain that a bit more? Flesh it out?
Flesh it out. Put some skin on it.
Yeah.
Like we said yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, they're good works. I mean, he's healing people, but these Jewish rulers are so stuck in their power play, wanting to be the elite, wanting to be in control, wanting to manipulate people, that when they see something that's undeniable, they should go, that's a really good thing. That man was in torture and he's been set free. But they are so constricted by hatred and pride and arrogance and selfishness because they belong to their father, the devil, as Jesus says in John 8, I think it is. Because of that, they cannot possibly think of any reason why it would be anyone other than the devil. They didn't realize they were actually working for the devil when they accused Jesus of working for the devil. They thought they were working for God, but they were actually working for the devil. And Jesus says elsewhere, he says, if the light if the light you think you have is darkness, how great is that darkness? And I think that's the case of where these guys were at. They thought they were in the light. They were convinced they were in the light, but the light they thought they had was actually darkness. And you can be in the dark and know you're in the dark, but when you're in the dark and you think you're in the light, that's really dark. That's really dangerous. And I think that's where these guys were at. They were so in the dark that they thought their way was right, and when they saw a different way that was actually the light, they accused it of being the darkness. So it was a complete reversal.
Okay, so is it kind of like giving more power to the devil than God? Like the devil, thinking the devil has more power than God has? Or am I totally off the mark there?
I just don't think they thought Jesus was doing anything for God. So whatever power he's doing, they're not denying something supernatural's happened. They're not denying that God can't do those supernatural things. They're just so bound up in, well, we didn't do it, so it can't have been God. He does it differently to us.
Okay,
So
all
it
right.
must be the devil because we're God's chosen. We're the right ones. So therefore, anything that Jesus does must be the devil. So they just got their complete blinkers on, I think.
Okay, I can see that when you
Yeah,
said
I think that's how I'd do
that
it.
statement. But you also made me think something quite terrifying. It's saying, what did you say? When people are in the darkness and they think they're in the light?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's sobering, isn't it?
It is sobering.
Yeah.
And I think particularly in the church context, because at times in church history and even church now,
absolutely, Jeannie.
they're acting in the darkness,
Yep.
doing the wrong thing.
And
They think-
convinced they're in the light.
Yes.
And oftentimes they'll actually quote that verse, or they'll quote, "Woe to those who call good evil and evil good," and think that they are quoting it the right way around, but they're actually calling the wrong things evil and wrong things good. It is a very sobering perspective to be in, and I think the right poised attitude to avoid that is an attitude of humility. I would much rather be questioning, going, where might my light that I think I have actually be dark, rather than being so convinced that my light is light. I think that when pride and arrogance and absolute confidence that I'm right about everything, I think that's when I run the risk of being in darkness. And there's
like what
lots
you
of the
said
Christian
then,
church
yeah.
saying that at the moment.
Yes. I think that's a really good thing to be humble.
Stay humble.
And have humility, because if
Where
you have
might
that,
I be in the dark and not realize I'm in the dark?
Yes. Yeah, because so many times I've read this next statement here, whoever speaks a word against the Son of Man, it will be forgiven, but whoever speaks against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven him. I remember reading this as a child thinking, I'm so sure I'm speaking against the Holy Spirit. I'm so sure that's
I've
me.
committed the unforgivable sin.
Like,
Exactly.
Yes, without even knowing what that is.
Yeah.
But when what you were just saying then, I have this thought, it's just forming in my mind. It's like I could be committing the unforgivable sin thinking I'm doing the right thing.
Yep.
Like I could be hurting people in church when I think I am leading in the right way.
Yep.
But if I had humility, then I am likely to see the wrong things I'm doing.
Yes.
Is that how I should be thinking
Yes,
this?
exactly. I think humility is the safest antidote to avoid ever falling into the position of committing the unforgivable sin. Exactly in a nutshell. We are going to make mistakes. There are going to be times. I've seen really well-meaning Christian evangelicals who get on Instagram and they'll or onto social media or YouTube or whatever, and they'll be pointing at other Christians saying that person's evil and this is why they're evil and you know, that's a prosperity preacher or that's this or that's that, and they mean well. And sometimes I go, look, maybe even they're right at times, but if I make my ministry around pointing out what's wrong in other people, I have to wonder if that's a dangerous, shaky way to build a ministry.
But couldn't that be seen as a loving response, saying, "Hey, I love you so much. I want to point out where you are wrong."
That is the argument that they'll use.
Because you need to grow from that.
That is the argument they'll use. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't sometimes do that. All I'm trying to say is that when I start to get convinced that my view is right, and that's what I see a lot in these kind of YouTube videos when I see them, and that is there's no humility. It doesn't seem to be humility. It's almost like an arrogance, as though those other people are so stupid. Why would you believe them? And it breeds of arrogance. That breeds of it concerns me. I'm not going to say it's wrong. I mean, it concerns me because it seems to be similar to what these people were accusing Jesus of doing. I would much rather, and I'm not saying blanket accept everything. I'm not saying, accept every teaching, test the spirits, check things out, but just be poised toward avoiding absolute arrogant, I'm right, you're wrong mentality wherever you can. There will be a handful of things where maybe we need to, but try to avoid that in the first instance, because that's when we can fall into the trap of actually having some darkness and thinking we're in the light. All I'm saying to us folks is just stay humble, stay willing to change, have people in your world who have a different perspective and go, hey, I think you're in the dark. I think you might think I'm in the dark. Hey, what's going on? Let's have a conversation, because maybe I need to lighten up some of my darkness a little bit, Come at it that way rather than pointing fingers at all the other people that are presuming to be in the dark. You're doing what you do because you're inspired by the enemy. This story tells me that's a dangerous perspective to be in.
Jesus here adds on a really good point where he says either make the tree good and its fruit will be good, or make the tree bad and its fruit will be bad.
Okay, what's he saying
For
there?
a tree is known by its fruit.
Yep.
So that is like showing us, hey, if you don't have good fruit,
Yes.
you're bad. And we should be able to recognize that.
Yes. So what he's doing here is he's drilling in and going, you should be able to see the fruit. So these YouTube people, what's the fruit of their life? Whatever it might be, on both sides. I mean, there is definitely extremes. The very people I'm saying are pointing at certain preachers who are, saying they're prosperity or whatever. There are plenty of people who are prosperity preachers or whatever. All I'm trying to say is we need to be looking at the fruit. That's what Jesus is saying here. In the end, our lives being transformed. Is good stuff happening, a blind seeing? Because if you're seeing those things, you know that it's probably good fruit.
Yes. My question, can a tree have both good fruit and bad fruit?
The presumption is no, it can't.
Okay. Well, then let's just mention Hillsong, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because I'm late to this. I just watched a Hillsong mega church exposed.
Right, yep. Yeah, and you just watched that, did you? Yep.
Yeah, just like literally last night.
Okay.
It's fascinating. But, okay, so there's obviously some bad fruit there.
Right, yep. So something's gone on that's created some unhealthiness. Yep.
Yes, particularly in what the people were talking about in the context of Hillsong College. There was some sort of damning evidence in that part.
Right.
However, there would be, do you remember this? Have you seen it?
Yes, a few years ago or a couple of years ago, whenever it came.
However, there are so many people in that church who are...
That's good fruit.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And who are bearing good fruit because of their experience of Hillsong.
Yep.
Yet there are some people who have sadly eaten or been force-fed bad fruit.
Okay, so maybe the point here is not to presume that you can blanket an entire movement or an entire church or an entire denomination with whether it's good fruit or bad fruit.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about this. You're really making a good point, because when you said, can a good tree bear bad fruit, and you asked, can it be good and bad, I implied straight away said, no, it can't, because a healthy tree will produce healthy fruit. But maybe in reality, I mean, you can, I guess theoretically, you could have a plum tree that's got some rotten plums and some good plums on it. I don't know. I'm not an agricultural person, but I guess that could be the case. Because I know in my life, I would have a mixture of good fruit and bad fruit. I think I would. I think there would be things where I've produced bad fruit, where my sinful nature has risen to the surface and has produced bad fruit in my life or in other people's lives. But that doesn't mean that because I've produced the odd bit of bad fruit here and there that everything else is dismissed. So maybe it is more accurate to say, look at a person's life, for instance, or look at what a person does over time and see what the overarching evidence is. Is there a lot of good fruit, or is there more bad fruit? Maybe that's a better way to look at it.
Yeah, I think that's a healthy way to look at it too.
A healthier, balanced way to look at it.
Because I think that's how the church has actually survived, because there is a lot of good, but there's also a lot of bad fruit.
Yes, exactly.
But hopefully there's more good fruit.
Hopefully there's more good fruit. Well, John Dixon and a couple of other Australians have done a series a few years ago on church and bullies, or something they called it, looking at the history of the church. Have you seen that one? Looking at the history of the church.
No, I haven't, but I would like to.
Yeah, and it's all about all the atrocities that the church has committed in the name of Christ. The insurrection and all this sort of stuff. And yet in the middle of that, somehow it's produced good fruit despite the bad fruit. So I think that is part of the condition of our hearts as we await the final fulfillment of Christ's redemption for us, is that we have this treasure in jars of clay, and we will mess up, we will sin. Hopefully over time we become more like Christ and we produce more good fruit and less bad fruit.
Yes, yeah, I agree with everything that you're saying there. But as I watch these documentaries and as I think about the church, and recently the Pope died, and so we're going to have a new Pope.
Yep.
I just think, wow, like when Jesus comes back, how accountable is the church going to be? How many sins are going to be exposed? How many people did the church hurt? And it's probably more than I would like to admit.
Yes, because it's a broken entity that God still works with fallen humans and graciously allows us to continue to work. But that's why Paul says, there is double responsibility, double honor. There's, the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be demanded. So all of those principles still at work in the world. If I'm going to presume to be a representative for Christ and be an influencer or a pastor like I am, I have to be aware that there is going to be a higher responsibility. Because there's a higher responsibility, there's going to be a higher expectation on me than on others. I think that would be it would be unfair not to have that.
Yeah, I agree. I understand what you're saying there. And if I put what we're talking about here back into the context of this verse, every kingdom divided against itself is headed for destruction, and no city or house divided will stand. The church must have been united and done really good things because it continues.
Yes.
It
continues despite.
Continues, yes. And people are working for God, because if God wasn't in the church, Jesus wasn't in the church, it just would have fallen flat. Like if lives weren't actually transformed.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes. But we have to have humility, as you said.
I think the key is humility here.
Yeah. And I was thinking about good fruit and bad fruit. You know that on like literal trees, if you leave fruit too long, it starts to rot.
Start to go off.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I think sometimes, if you've been a pastor, I'm not saying I know what
you're saying.
If you've been a pastor or in your, even in the ministry area in your church, and you've been there for a long time, you might start to get a bit sour.
Yeah, exactly. Or you're not using the fruit. I mean, if we're producing fruit is to feed other people.
Yes.
Which is go back to our conversation earlier in the week. If I'm supposed to be a fruit tree, it needs to be picked and eaten.
Yeah.
If I'm just a fruit tree, look at me, look how much fruit I've got, but it's all selfish. I'm keeping it for myself. That's not what a fruit tree's for. A fruit tree's to produce fruit to sustain others. So that's how I stay fresh. I stay pruned. I try to stay vibrant by giving away the fruit that God has given me. Hopefully, less and less bad fruit. Humility will help me avoid bad fruit so that I can produce more good fruit. That's just the desire that I have anyway.
That's a good desire.
Stay humble, folks.
Yes, stay humble. And look how we've got this verse. We started talking about demons, and now we've switched it.
Yes, we have, haven't we? Actually, we've done that a lot this week. We've gone off track quite a bit this week. But no, it's all been good conversation, though. Yeah,
that's true. But I did hear once have you heard this funny saying? When Jesus fell out of heaven, you know where he landed?
No.
In the church choir.
No, I haven't heard that.
You haven't heard that.
I haven't heard that one.
But you could
because I know what they're going at.
You could substitute that for in church part ministry or whatever.
Yes, I know what you're talking. But in church choir, you're talking about all the bickering and one-upping, and you sung out of key, and but that happens in worship.
The promotion
teams as well.
of self.
Yeah, promotion of self. All those things
in the entire church.
It's the human condition. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
You've never heard that?
No, I haven't heard that one.
Okay.
I haven't heard
well,
that
you learned something new.
I did learn something new.
Yes.
Yep. All right. Anything else you want to add?
No.
That'll do us
right
for
now.
today.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Jeannie. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you next week. See you then.
See ya.